History is often shaped not only by revolutions, but by the men who survive them. For more than 3 decades, one figure has stood at the center of Iran's politics, religion, and foreign policy. Admired by loyal supporters, condemned by fierce critics, and watched closely by the world, his decisions have influenced wars, diplomacy, and the balance of power across the Middle East. Yet his rise to the summit of power was anything but inevitable. Born into a modest religious family, he witnessed the fall of a monarchy, the birth of an Islamic revolution, survived an assassination attempt that left him permanently scarred, and ultimately inherited one of the most powerful positions in the Muslim world. His name is Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. To understand the modern Islamic Republic of Iran, we must first understand the man who has led it since 1989, a leader whose life has become inseparable from the history of his nation. This is the story of Ali Khamenei. Ali Khamenei was born on July 17, 1939 in the holy city of Mashhad in northeastern Iran, although some sources place his birth on April 19, 1939. At the time, Iran was known as the Imperial State of Iran, ruled by the Pahlavi monarchy rather than the Islamic Republic that exists today. His father, Javad Khamenei, was a respected Shia cleric of Iranian Azeri descent whose family originated from the village of Kamana in East Azerbaijan province. It was from this village that the family adopted its surname. After studying in Najaf, one of Shia Islam's holiest cities, Javad settled in Mashhad, where he married Khadija Murtamati. Together they raised 8 children in a household deeply rooted in religious scholarship. Although never wealthy, the family enjoyed considerable respect within the local community. Javad frequently led Friday prayers, while Ali's mother introduced him to Persian history, literature, and culture. Years later, Khamenei would describe his childhood as one of hardship, recalling a simple home and a life built on modest means. Whether entirely accurate or somewhat romanticized, these memories became an important part of the image he later projected as a leader who understood ordinary Iranians. Long before Ali Khamenei entered politics, Iran itself was undergoing profound transformation. Unlike much of the Middle East, Persia had escaped direct European colonization during the 19th century. It remained one of the region's oldest civilizations, heir to empires that had dominated Western Asia for thousands of years. During the Safavid dynasty, Persia became the leading center of Twelver Shia Islam, establishing a religious identity that still defines Iran today. The Qajar dynasty ruled until 1925, when military officer Reza Shah Pahlavi seized power and founded the Pahlavi dynasty, launching an ambitious campaign of modernization and secular reform. During the Second World War, however, Britain and the Soviet Union invaded Iran, fearing German influence in the region. Reza Shah was forced to abdicate in 1941, and his young son, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, inherited the throne. Although the Shah modernized the country and encouraged rapid economic development, his rule also relied heavily on political repression. His feared intelligence service, SAVAK, became notorious for surveillance, imprisonment, and torture of political opponents. For many religious leaders, the Shah's vision of a Western-oriented Iran represented a direct challenge to the country's Islamic identity. Young Ali Khamenei grew up at the heart of this conflict. Following his father's guidance, Khamenei entered religious education at an early age. He studied under leading scholars in Mashhad before briefly continuing his studies in Najaf, Iraq, the burial place of Imam Ali, one of the holiest figures in Shia Islam. His journey eventually brought him to the religious city of Qom, where, in 1957, he began studying under a rising scholar named Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini. At the time, Khomeini was emerging as one of the Shah's most outspoken critics. For the young Khamenei, this relationship would prove life-changing. Everything changed in 1963. The Shah introduced an ambitious modernization program known as the White Revolution, designed to reform land ownership, industrialize the economy, and move Iran closer to the West. To many urban reformers, these policies represented progress. But among the religious establishment, they were viewed as a direct assault on traditional Islamic society. No critic was louder than Ayatollah Khamenei. His fiery sermons condemned both the Shah and what he viewed as growing American influence in Iran. The government responded swiftly. Khomeini was arrested in June 1963, sparking nationwide demonstrations in which hundreds of protesters were killed. Although released, he continued his criticism until the Shah finally exiled him in 1964. Khomeini spent the next 14 years abroad, first in Turkey, then Iraq, and finally France, where he became the symbolic leader of Iran's growing opposition movement. Unlike many of Khomeini's followers, however, Ali Khamenei remained inside Iran. He returned to Mashhad to care for his aging father while quietly expanding his role within the underground religious opposition. Throughout the late 1960s and 1970s, Khamenei transformed from scholar into activist. In 1967, he translated The Future in Islamic Lands, written by Egyptian Islamist thinker Sayyid Qutb, into Persian. His own introduction declared confidently that the future belongs to Islam. The Shah's security service quickly banned the work. Khamenei soon became a frequent target of Savak. He was arrested several times, often spending months in prison. His longest detention lasted from January to August 1975, much of it in solitary confinement, while his family remained unaware of his whereabouts. Far from silencing him, imprisonment only strengthened his determination. Traveling across Iran whenever possible, he delivered sermons denouncing the monarchy and calling for an Islamic future. In 1977, he helped establish the Association of Combatant Clergy, an organization dedicated to opposing the Shah's rule. By then, the Pahlavi regime was beginning to lose its grip. Economic difficulties, growing public unrest, and increasingly violent confrontations between protesters and security forces pushed Iran toward a breaking point. Neither the Shah nor Savak could halt the momentum of revolution. And as Iran edged closer to the defining upheaval of 1979, Ali Khamenei stood among the religious figures preparing for a dramatic transformation that would forever change the Middle East. The year 1979 would redefine Iran forever. For months, the country's streets had echoed with chants demanding the end of the monarchy. What began as scattered demonstrations had evolved into a national uprising, drawing together students, workers, merchants, religious leaders, and ordinary citizens from every corner of the country. The Pahlavi state was beginning to unravel. Despite deploying the military and imposing harsh security measures, the government found itself unable to regain control. Every attempt to crush the demonstrations only encouraged larger crowds to return to the streets. Then, on January 16, 1979, history took a dramatic turn. Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi boarded an aircraft and left Iran. Officially, his departure was described as temporary. In reality, it marked the end of a monarchy that had ruled the country for more than half a century. Across Iran, scenes of celebration spread from city to city. For supporters of the revolution, the seemingly impossible had become reality. But the revolution still lacked its leader. That changed on 1 February 1979. After nearly 15 years in exile, Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini returned to Tehran. Millions filled the streets to welcome him home, creating one of the largest public gatherings in modern history. His arrival transformed a popular uprising into an organized revolution under religious leadership. Within days, the remaining pillars of the monarchy collapsed. Military commanders declared neutrality, government ministries fell under revolutionary control, and on February 11, 1979, the Pahlavi dynasty officially ceased to exist. The Iranian Revolution had succeeded. Yet victory immediately raised another question. Who would shape the future of Iran? The alliance that had overthrown the Shah was far from united. Liberals envisioned a democratic republic. Left-wing movements sought sweeping socialist reforms. Nationalists pursued their own political ambitions. Ayatollah Khomeini had a different vision. He believed Iran should be governed according to Islamic principles under the guidance of the country's senior religious scholars. Over the following months, that vision steadily became reality. A national referendum established the Islamic Republic of Iran, and a new constitution created the office of Supreme Leader, granting Ayatollah Khamenei ultimate authority over the nation's political, military, and religious affairs. As the new state took shape, Ali Khamenei quietly emerged as one of its rising figures. Unlike many revolutionary leaders who suddenly entered public life, Khamenei had spent years building networks, organizing opposition, and earning Khomeini's confidence. That trust now translated into responsibility. He became a member of the Islamic Revolutionary Council, the body responsible for overseeing the transition from monarchy to republic. Soon afterward, he helped establish the Islamic Republican Party, which rapidly became the dominant political force within the new government. His influence extended beyond politics. Appointed as Tehran's Friday prayer leader, Khamenei addressed thousands each week, becoming one of the most recognizable voices of the revolution. His speeches defended the ideals of the Islamic Republic while urging national unity during an uncertain period. But the revolution's greatest battles were not yet over. Inside Iran, armed opposition groups launched a campaign of bombings and assassinations against senior officials. At the same time, the country's new leadership struggled to stabilize a nation still recovering from months of upheaval. Ali Khamenei soon became one of their targets. On June 27, 1981, he arrived at Abuzer Mosque in southern Tehran to deliver a public address. As the audience settled into silence, a tape recorder placed beside the podium suddenly exploded. The blast tore through the stage. Khamenei survived, but only narrowly. His right arm was permanently paralyzed, while severe injuries to his shoulder and vocal cords left lasting physical scars. The distinctive voice that would later become familiar across Iran was, in part, the result of that explosion. The attack was widely blamed on the Forkan Group, an armed organization opposed to the Islamic Republic. Ironically, the assassination attempt strengthened Khamenei's standing. To many supporters of the revolution, the wounded cleric became a symbol of sacrifice and unwavering commitment to the new state. Only weeks later, Iran was plunged into another political crisis. President Abolhassan Banisadr had already been removed from office, and on August 30, 1981, his successor, Mohammad Ali Rajai, together with Prime Minister Mohammad Javad Behonor, was killed in a devastating bombing. For the second time in a single year, the presidency stood vacant. The Islamic Republic urgently needed stability. Despite still recovering from his injuries, Ali Khamenei accepted the responsibility. On October 2, 1981, the Iranian people elected him as the third president of the Islamic Republic of Iran. Only a few years earlier, he had been a cleric working in the shadows of an underground movement. Now, at the age of 42, he stood at the center of Iran's new political order. But his presidency would begin under the shadow of an even greater crisis. Across Iran's western border, a brutal war with Iraq was already raging, a conflict that would shape both the future of the Islamic Republic and the destiny of the man who would one day become its supreme leader. Ali Khamenei assumed the presidency at one of the most perilous moments in Iran's modern history. On October 2, 1981, he took office as the third president of the Islamic Republic of Iran, inheriting a nation scarred by political violence and already locked in a devastating war with neighboring Iraq. The conflict had begun on September 22, 1980, when Iraqi President Saddam Hussein ordered a full-scale invasion of Iran. Believing that the Islamic Revolution had weakened the country, Iraq hoped to secure a swift military victory and expand its influence along the strategic Shatt al-Arab waterway. The war unfolded very differently. Instead of collapsing, Iran mobilized on an extraordinary scale. Regular army units fought alongside the newly formed Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, while hundreds of thousands of volunteers answered the government's call to defend the revolution. For nearly 8 years, the two nations became locked in one of the longest conventional wars of the 20th century. Cities were reduced to rubble. Oil facilities became military targets. Missile attacks reached deep into civilian areas, while trench warfare and chemical weapons inflicted immense suffering on both sides. As president, Khamenei was not Iran's supreme decision-maker. That authority remained with Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, whose position as supreme leader placed him above every elected institution. Even so, Khamenei became one of the public faces of the wartime government. He traveled across the country to visit military units, met with commanders, addressed the nation during moments of crisis, and worked closely with senior officials to maintain political stability as the conflict dragged on year after year. Among those officials was Akbar Hashemi Rafsanjani, an influential revolutionary leader whose partnership with Khamenei would prove increasingly important during the final years of the war. By 1988, both Iran and Iraq had paid an enormous price. Neither side had achieved a decisive victory, and years of fighting had exhausted their economies and populations. Facing mounting pressure, Iran accepted United Nations Security Council Resolution 598, bringing the conflict to an end. For Ayatollah Khomeini, accepting the ceasefire was an extraordinarily painful decision. He famously compared it to drinking a chalice of poison, acknowledging the heavy sacrifices made throughout the war. Peace had finally arrived. But within a year, the Islamic Republic faced an even greater uncertainty. On June 3, 1989, Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini died. For 10 years, he had stood at the heart of the Islamic Republic, guiding its revolution, shaping its institutions, and defining its ideology. His death left behind a question that few had dared to contemplate. Who could replace the founder of the revolution? The responsibility fell to the Assembly of Experts, the constitutional body tasked with selecting Iran's next supreme leader. Several senior clerics possessed stronger religious credentials than Ali Khamenei. By traditional standards, he was not considered the obvious choice, and according to later accounts, Khamenei himself expressed doubts about accepting such an immense responsibility. Yet the country needed a leader capable of preserving unity after Khomeini's death. During the Assembly's deliberations, Akbar Hashemi Rafsanjani recalled conversations in which Khomeini had expressed confidence in Khamenei's leadership. Whether decisive or not, those statements carried significant influence. On June 4, 1989, the Assembly elected Ali Khamenei as the second supreme leader of the Islamic Republic of Iran. It was one of the most consequential decisions in Iran's modern history. Soon afterward, constitutional amendments removed the requirement that the supreme leader be among the highest-ranking Shia religious authorities, ensuring that Khamenei's appointment aligned with the country's revised constitutional framework. But inheriting Khomeini's office did not mean inheriting his unquestioned authority. Unlike his predecessor, whose influence had been forged through revolution and religious prestige, Khamenei faced the challenge of establishing his own legitimacy. He approached that challenge gradually. Working alongside the newly elected president Akbar Hashemi Rafsanjani, Khamenei sought to stabilize a nation emerging from 8 years of war. While Rafsanjani focused on rebuilding Iran's shattered economy and infrastructure, the supreme leader concentrated on strengthening the institutions that would safeguard the Islamic Republic. During these early years, Khamenei expanded the influence of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, reinforced the authority of the supreme leader's office, and deepened ties with Iran's religious and security establishments. These measures would reshape the balance of power inside Iran for decades to come. The cautious wartime president had become the nation's highest authority. And as a new decade began, Ali Khamenei was preparing to transform the office of supreme leader into the dominant force in Iranian politics, a role that would define both his legacy and the future of the Islamic Republic. As the 1990s dawned, Ali Khamenei faced a challenge unlike any before. The revolution had been won. The war with Iraq had ended. But now came the far more difficult task of securing the future of the Islamic Republic. Unlike Ayatollah Khomeini, whose authority had been built on revolutionary charisma, Khamenei understood that his leadership would depend on strengthening the institutions of the state. Over the years that followed, he carefully expanded the influence of the supreme leader's office, ensuring that its authority reached every major pillar of Iranian society, from the armed forces and judiciary to state broadcasting and religious foundations. One institution became especially significant. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, originally established to defend the revolution, evolved into one of the country's most powerful organizations. Its influence gradually extended beyond military affairs into politics, intelligence, and the economy, becoming a central pillar of Khamenei's leadership. While Iran sought stability at home, it also began redefining its role abroad. The collapse of the Soviet Union and the shifting balance of power in the Middle East presented both opportunities and challenges. Under Khamenei's leadership, Iran strengthened ties with movements and governments that shared its strategic interests. Its long-standing partnership with Hezbollah in Lebanon deepened, while support for Palestinian groups such as Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad became an important element of Iran's regional strategy. Tehran argued that these alliances were essential for resisting foreign influence, while its critics accused Iran of expanding its reach through proxy organizations. As regional tensions intensified, Iran's relationship with the United States grew increasingly hostile. Washington accused Tehran of supporting militant groups and pursuing policies that threatened regional stability. Iran, meanwhile, maintained that it was defending its sovereignty against decades of external pressure. No issue would define this confrontation more than Iran's nuclear program. Although Iran's nuclear ambitions had begun before the 1979 revolution, the program expanded significantly during Khamenei's leadership. Iranian officials insisted that its purpose was peaceful, emphasizing energy production and scientific research. Many Western governments, however, feared that the program could eventually lead to the development of nuclear weapons. The dispute soon became one of the most contentious international issues of the early 21st century. As negotiations stalled, the United Nations, the United States, and the European Union imposed increasingly severe economic sanctions. Restrictions on banking, oil exports, and international trade placed enormous pressure on Iran's economy, contributing to inflation, unemployment, and declining living standards. Inside the country, political divisions were also becoming more visible. In 1997, the election of President Mohammad Khatami reflected growing public demand for political reform and greater social freedoms. His administration promoted dialogue with the international community and encouraged a more open political atmosphere. Yet meaningful reform faced significant obstacles. Many key institutions remained under the authority of the supreme leader, and conservative factions resisted changes they believed could weaken the Islamic Republic's ideological foundations. The tensions between reformists and conservatives reached a dramatic turning point after the 2009 presidential election. When President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad was declared the winner, many Iranians alleged widespread electoral fraud. What followed became known as the Green Movement, one of the largest protest movements since the 1979 revolution. Millions marched through Tehran and other cities demanding greater transparency and political accountability. The government responded with a sweeping security crackdown. Demonstrations were dispersed, opposition leaders were placed under house arrest, and thousands of protesters were detained. The events of 2009 revealed deep political divisions within Iranian society, divisions that would continue to shape the country's future. Even amid domestic unrest, the nuclear issue remained unresolved. A breakthrough finally came in 2015. After years of negotiations, Iran and 6 world powers signed the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, widely known as the JCPOA. Under the agreement, Iran accepted strict limitations on its nuclear activities in exchange for relief from international sanctions. Supporters hailed the accord as a historic opportunity to reduce tensions and reintegrate Iran into the global economy. But the agreement proved fragile. In 2018, the United States withdrew from the JCPOA and reimposed extensive economic sanctions. The decision triggered a new period of confrontation. Iran gradually reduced its compliance with parts of the agreement, while tensions across the Middle East continued to escalate. The rivalry reached another dramatic moment on January 3, 2020, when Iranian General Qasem Soleimani, commander of the Quds Force, was killed in a United States drone strike near Baghdad International Airport. For many Iranians, Soleimani was regarded as a national hero who had played a key role in fighting extremist groups across the region. Millions attended funeral processions held across Iran. For others abroad, he remained one of the Middle East's most controversial military figures. His death brought Iran and the United States closer to direct confrontation than at any time in decades. As regional uncertainty deepened, Iran entered another political transition. In 2021, Ebrahim Raisi, a close ally of Ali Khamenei, was elected president of Iran. Many observers viewed his election as a sign that the country's leadership was entering a new phase, one in which the institutions built over 3 decades under Khamenei's guidance appeared more firmly established than ever before. Yet beneath the surface, economic hardship, international isolation, and growing public dissatisfaction continued to test the resilience of the Islamic Republic. Its greatest internal challenge was still to come. That challenge arrived in September 2022. The death of Mahsa Amini, a 22-year-old Iranian woman who died after being detained by the country's morality police, ignited the largest wave of protests Iran had witnessed in years. What began as public anger over her death rapidly evolved into nationwide demonstrations demanding broader political, social, and economic change. The government responded with a wide-ranging security crackdown. Thousands of people were arrested, demonstrations were dispersed, and internet restrictions were imposed in many areas. Officials defended their actions as necessary to preserve national stability, while critics argued that the response reflected growing tensions between the state and parts of Iranian society. Even as unrest continued at home, the Middle East was entering another dangerous chapter. Following the outbreak of the Israel-Hamas war in October 2023, regional tensions intensified dramatically. Iran continued to support its long-standing regional allies, while Israel increased military operations across the region. The decades-long rivalry between the two countries was becoming increasingly direct. In 2024, that rivalry crossed a historic threshold. For the first time, Iran and Israel exchanged direct military strikes, raising fears that the region could be drawn into a wider war. Although both sides avoided a prolonged conflict, the confrontation marked one of the most dangerous moments in their modern history. Only weeks later, Iran faced another unexpected shock. On May 19, 2024, President Ebrahim Raisi was killed in a helicopter crash in northwestern Iran, alongside Foreign Minister Hossein Khamenei and several other officials. The tragedy prompted a new presidential election, but the country's broader political system remained firmly under the authority of the supreme leader. By then, Ali Khamenei had spent more than 3 decades guiding the Islamic Republic through revolutions' aftermath, war, sanctions, diplomatic crises, domestic unrest, and profound geopolitical change. To his supporters, he remains the guardian of Iran's Islamic revolution and a symbol of resistance against foreign pressure. To his critics, he represents an era of concentrated authority, political restrictions, and continuing confrontation with the West. Few leaders in the modern Middle East have shaped their nation's destiny so profoundly or inspired such deeply divided opinions. From a young theology student in Mashhad to a revolutionary activist, from surviving an assassination attempt to becoming Iran's second supreme leader, Ali Khamenei's life has become inseparable from the history of the Islamic Republic itself. His decisions have influenced conflicts, diplomacy, and the balance of power across the Middle East, leaving an impact that extends far beyond Iran's borders. Whether history ultimately judges him as the protector of a revolution or one of the region's most controversial rulers remains a question for future generations. For over 3 decades, Ali Khamenei has stood at the heart of a nation that continues to shape the politics of the Middle East. His leadership has guided Iran through moments of triumph and crisis, hope and uncertainty, leaving a legacy that extends far beyond its borders. Whether viewed as a guardian of the revolution or one of the region's most controversial leaders, his impact on modern history is undeniable. And as the next chapter of Iran's story unfolds, the legacy of Ali Khamenei will continue to be felt for generations to come.